Sure. Well, thanks to the editorial board for having Andy and I here. I did this 4 years ago and I enjoyed it, and I think it's a great service that you're performing for the community. As most of you know, I've even before I became alderman, I represented most of the area of the ward, or a large part of it, on the county board, and I, from the beginning, immersed myself fully into the community that I represent. I go to almost all the neighborhood association meetings, participate in community events, and keep in touch with my constituents by, I believe I'm the only alderman who writes a monthly view from City Hall column for any of the neighborhood newsletters that want it, and I have an open line with my constituents, uh, promptly return emails, phone calls, and act on their request the best that I can. Since I became alderman of Ward 5, more than $4.2 million in Enos Park TIF funds have been spent on improving and fixing up the Enos Park neighborhood, and more than 1.2 million has gone to the Enos Park Development Company, LLC, which was just created a few years ago to acquire vacant homes and properties, and it's really helped in fixing up the neighborhood and also in demolishing properties that are beyond repair. I think the State Journal Register, in a study done last year, found that I was one of the top two most effective aldermen in terms of introducing and passing ordinances. I co-sponsored the abandoned properties ordinance, which something that we really needed to finally put an end to the endless cycle of registering abandoned properties. I passed a law that that prohibits panhandling downtown, created the Roundup program for to help the homeless, and passed an ordinance that ends gender discrimination that the lake clubs were engaging in in Lake Springfield. And I passed an ordinance that gave a preference to contractors who are in the county but not in the city. That helps our economy. I supported the 3-year infrastructure program that's now paved and blacktop many miles of streets and fixed many sidewalks, bridges, and other infrastructure. Since I became, in the last year, our city finances have really turned around. We went from end-of-year cash balance of negative $2,607,802 to 2015. We now have a positive balance of $5,300,000, and there's similar turnaround in the end-of-year fund balance. I supported the Maximus study. That was a divided vote on the council, and to create more efficiencies in government. It was done, and many of the recommendations in the report were followed by the council and by the mayor to save money. One thing I noticed in the editorial that the State Journal Register did in anticipation of these interviews said one thing, that your editorial board had a desire to see the council overcome conflict, and that elected officials should be respectful to each other. And that's one thing that I've done on the council. I don't think I've ever made any personal attacks, and when I've been chairman of the committee of the whole, unfortunately, there have been times when I'd had to ask the members to not make personal attacks and limit their comments to the issues that were before the committee. Government transparency is something I'm very concerned about, and I have passed ordinances that create government efficiency. For example, the one that we just passed on the executive orders requiring the mayor to file those with the city clerk. And I also passed last year an ordinance that gave the city council the authority, or said the city council had the authority to determine when executive session audio recordings should be made public. And that, prior to that, the city code said it was up to the corporation council. So we're actually going to vote tonight on one of those ordinances to make the meeting on the Shredgate executive session, make those audio tapes public. We've made tremendous strides downtown with the development of the downtown with TIF funds. Even we've got the building where Joan Walters resides as a result of that. There's been many other buildings. The Cub Foods, the County Market was created with the help of assistant of downtown TIF funds, and we've got the booth building that's in process, and many other projects. And I want to continue the downtown development, and other savings that we've created. The garage consolidation is another example of where we've been able to create efficiencies and save money. So I want to continue with that. Ensure the infrastructure. We continue working on that. Work on creating a quiet zone on 3rd Street, and work on the moving the 3rd Street rail over to 10th. I think that's essential. And body cameras for police officers, I think, are also very important to create more trust between the community and law enforcement. And we need to focus on also more attention on the older neighborhoods. I'm working on legislation to even strengthen the abandoned properties ordinance that we passed in 2011. Thank you.
We'll come back around to the
Sure.
Please, would you like
Okay. Great. Well, thank you much. My name is Andrew Proctor, and thank you much for having me here. Appreciate this opportunity to talk with you and meet with you about the issues facing our city and facing the constituents of Ward 5. Name's Andrew Proctor. I live in Enos Park with my wife Heather and our 2 children. Got a 6-month-old baby boy at home right now. His name's Lincoln, and I have a 6-year-old stepson named Charlie. He just turned 6 on February 2nd. We moved to Enos Park in one of the historic homes about a year and a half ago. And prior to that, we lived in downtown in Lincoln Tower. We wanted to be part of a community, an active community. We read so much about what Enos Park was doing and how they embraced the community and how all the members of the community got together. And actually this house that we saw was the first house we saw, and we fell in love with it. And then we met with members of the community, and they embraced us. And so we moved in on January 8th. We've been active in the neighborhood association ever since. My wife and I and my family take part in the community gardens each year. We're getting ready to plant again soon here in April. It's actually right behind our house, behind our alley. I take part in actually helping mow the vacant lots we have. So we have, I think we're 40 lots that we have to mow, and I take an active part in helping there with my riding lawnmower I borrow from a neighbor. And I help with researching issues that we currently face with abandoned properties and halfway houses. And so I lend my services to the leaders of the neighborhood association to look at those issues. And that's why I got in this race. When we moved in, we were told that we were moving by a halfway house. It was properly registered, properly licensed with the state of Illinois. He actually owns 2, and they're within about 400 feet of each other. We later found out if we moved in that they are not licensed by the state of Illinois. They're not regulated. They're not properly staffed. There's active, it's criminals that have been moving in and out of there, sexual predators. It's just a house it's just a bad house to have in our neighborhood. And I found out there's other houses like these in Ward 5 that are sprouting up. They've either been there for 6 to 12 years, or there's new ones that are popping up. And I kept thinking, why are we still dealing with these properties? Why isn't the city being more proactive at dealing with these properties? We know that they're not licensed by the city or by the state. We know they're not properly staffed, not properly ran. And the people that are in those houses, they're just staying. They're not moving along. It's not fulfilling the proper role of a halfway house. And I began to talk about this issue with the neighbors and family, and they agreed with me. Why isn't the city being more proactive about it? And the thought came up, maybe we should, I was asked by some neighbors to consider running for alderman, because of this issue. In Enos Park, we've been dealing with one of these houses, 2 of these houses actually, for 6 years. So that's one of my goals as part of this campaign, is to bring that issue to light to the public, and also, if fortunate enough to be elected, to combat this problem and make sure the city is a proactive partner in trying to regulate these facilities and make sure that they're ran properly. And with that also, I want to make sure that the police and fire departments have the proper tools in their toolbox to combat other issues that we're facing in Ward 5. Abandoned properties is plaguing our areas and continue to plague our areas. And we keep talking about it every year, and every 4 years it seems like every time the election season comes up again. It's become an issue for people, the candidates, to talk about. Well, I don't want to talk about it in 4 years if I'm fortunate enough to be elected, because I want that issue solved, during the 4 years I'm the alderman. I want to form a coalition on the council to help tackle that problem. There are other tools that other cities look at, and one of them that's being well done and having proven results is a land bank that we have in Enos Park. And I want to expand those principles of land bank, the entity, to other targeted areas in the city to help tackle these abandoned properties that we were dealing with. Oak Ridge area being one. That area is just being plagued with abandoned properties right now, and it's starting to sprout up in the Lincoln Park neighborhood and the regions north of that. So those are areas that I want to hit as alderman. And then also a rental registration program, and so that the fire and police know who owns these rental properties, in the single family houses that have been gutted up and turned into multi-family rental properties. There's a lot of people that live these, and there's a lot of great landlords, but there's also some bad landlords. And I want to make sure that these bad landlords are being called to action to be part of the solution to help solve these issues that we have in these apartments that are causing issue in our neighborhoods, because if they're just let to sit, they'll fester.
So really quickly,
Mhm.
point of clarification, you want the people who own the rental properties to be registered, not the people who are renting the units.
Correct.
In these properties.
Right, the landlords, yes. Yeah, especially the absentee landlords, the ones that live out of town, or banks them, or whoever owns these landlords. And sometimes the city just doesn't know who owns these apartments, and we need to make a list, and registration list, fee, no fee. I prefer no fee, of course, just something that the city could use to go after, to talk to, so they know who they're talking about if there's these chronic issues at these locations.
Isn't that available at the recorder's office anyway?
Property tax records, but sometimes those are not reliable to what, with the contact information for who is managing those facilities.
Have you looked up some of them that you have concerns about? By that?
I don't have unique concerns yet. I've been told about certain issues, but I don't have exact addresses for you. But I do know that they're out there.
Just one other question. You brought up these halfway houses or something.
Right.
Are those like official or formal halfway houses? Because if judges are putting people in places to stay, you would think that somebody has to license them, because they can't just put them anywhere, right?
I would agree.
So what are they? Or do you have the addresses?
Well, I don't. I can get you the addresses. The two I'm talking to are about on our 5th Street. What I think they fall through the cracks is that they advertise themselves as halfway houses or transitional facilities, and then these people, apply to live there, or whatever the process is that person is running. And then they move in, and the city classifies them as boarding houses because they're unrelated individuals that live in these houses. Well, either they're being advertised or being sold as to these people that are moving in as halfway houses, or they're just the nature of these individuals in there. And so it is kind of clouded in the public scheme of things of what these actually are. And so those are actually, because halfway houses are rent properly, those are fine. There's some good examples in Vinegar Hill, the Veterans House down there. But these ones that are falling through the cracks, there's got to be a nature either in the city code or the state about how these being ran.
Do you know who pays the rent?
Well, most of the times the Social Security disability checks is being written over to the owner.
Okay. Sam, are you familiar with these?
Yeah, I'm very familiar with this. The problem with the halfway houses is they are regulated to the extent if the city zoning law says that you can only have you can have up to 5 unrelated people living in the same household. So if they have 5 or less, then somebody could. And I even read a letter to the editor somebody wrote in Lincoln where he was on vacation, and when he came back, the house next door had been sold and was a group home. And I think that's not the way, that isn't proper for that. It's something that changes the fundamental character of a residential neighborhood should be allowed to change without any getting any special permission or from the council or a hearing for the residents to weigh in. So what I've said, and what I'm actually working on legislation, I've written about this in my column, and we may have the legislation by the next council meeting, is that a new group home that wants to open that has 5 or less people unrelated should also be required to get either a zoning variance or some kind of permission from the city council to open, so that the residents can then weigh in and talk to their alderman, talk to the council, and it may be a good fit or it may not be. So that would be for future group homes. There was one with regard to, there is a group home on North 8th Street which has 5 or less, and they sought a zoning variance recently to increase it to, I think, 7 or 8. Neighbors came to me, they were opposed to it, and I advised them to go and testify at the Planning and Zoning Commission. They did, and the Planning and Zoning Commission then recommended denial, and it actually didn't even come to the council because the petitioner just gave up. They knew I was going to be against it, and they figured it never passed the council. So that's, and the way these group, and there was the other group homes that I worked on in Ward 5, and getting rid of them were the ones on 10th Street, that the Rainbow Houses, where the people who are released from the Department of Corrections are there, and the city, went after them because the city's claiming that they're in violation of our current zoning regulations. So the owner petitioned the zoning commission for a variance, which was, I think the Planning and Zoning Commission recommended denial. Anyways, it came to the city council, and I advocated denial, and the city council in a divided vote did deny the variance.
Okay, and you said you got some new legislation. Does that have anything to do with the fact there's an election going on and it's come up?
No, it's due to the fact that I think it's fundamentally unfair for the people who live in a residential neighborhood, and they expect it's a residential neighborhood, and then for all of a sudden a use that's like more of an institutional nature, like a hospital, to just come in and maybe move right next door to them without any kind of hearing or opportunity for the neighbors to weigh in. I think that's wrong.
Follow up?
Sure.
Yeah, because it's a complicated issue, because it's not only just about the property; it's about the individuals that are there. There's a program in Rockford called Raven that they actually coordinate with the licensed house, the city, faith-based organizations, and help these individuals transition from the nature of being criminals to a nature of being productive members of society. And so it's not just enough about saying that the property can be zoned properly or not. It's also about making sure that the individuals that are there, they're being treated well, and the staff is doing their job of what they need to do. And so if we have too many of these facilities that are falling through the cracks, it's just a continuing problem they'll perpetuate, and these people won't get the help they need or to provide the path to go back to be productive members of society. And so that's a program that I want to research and bring down to Springfield and work in collaboration with other people who have an interest in these individuals, and help them get back on their feet. And so that's the nature of this as well. It's not always just about zoning for these properties.
Well, if I might just briefly respond, I agree with Andrew to a certain extent on this, that what I'm proposing wouldn't affect the current group homes, and I do think we need to do something to regulate them, or bring them to have some legislation, maybe licensing or something, that would allow some oversight by the city to make sure that the people who are living there are treated properly, they're not abused, and that they don't create problems for the neighbors. So, I mean, some of them, neighbors tell me, I know one that treats former rehab alcoholics who are trying to be rehabilitated, and they've told me they have experienced no problems from that one. Another one on Elliott, I get all sorts of complaints from the neighbors, and I've asked the zoning department to look into it. Their neighbors were saying that they believe more than 5 unrelated people were living there. So the zoning department's currently investigating that.
I was thinking about the ordinance you were talking about, where you make it becomes more transparent. People are able to get involved earlier. Does that open the door to more people saying, well, has anybody ever been blind to halfway home in their neighborhood? It seems like there's a balance there that you can
Well, if they're, right now, if they have 6 or more unrelated, they do have to get zoning relief. I don't see why it should be any different if there's 5 or less, because it's a different, I see it as a different type of use than in, the normal residential use where you have either a family or maybe a group of people together decide they want to rent the house. This is like where you have one proprietor, he owns the house or rents the house, and then he gets all these individuals, and he's responsible, or he has to say whether they can be there or not be there, and then he collects the money from them, and then pays the rent or pays the mortgage. So I think it's fundamentally different type of use.
So would that be even with 1 or 2 residents who are in a program, or you said 5 or less is they don't have to do anything now? Would you want a zoning change if there's like 2 people?
If it's a group home, yeah. If that's we'd have to define it. I think I've done some research on this, and I think there's a way to define it.
On the same lines, since we're talking about property, the abandoned property ordinance. How's that been going? How many did you say are in the neighborhood? One of you said 40. Or was that just Anne's Park? That's not in the ward, right?
Oh, I don't think it specified a number.
Okay,
but
I'm sorry.
No. No, but there's a considerable amount. I think we're talking about vacant lots.
Vacant lot. Okay, just vacant lots.
Or the ones you mow?
Yes, right. The ones that move, right.
The buildings have been torn down to the city program. How many of those have been in Ward 5, would you say?
How many have been demolished in Ward 5?
Yeah.
I think maybe 10, 15. I'm not sure the exact number. I can certainly find that out. But I did, in our recent budget debate, the mayor had actually proposed spending less on demolitions than had been in the budget the previous year, and I sponsored an amendment to increase the spending on demolitions to at least the same amount that we had in last year's initial budget, and that was co-sponsored. I think 5 other aldermen joined on as co-sponsors, and it passed unanimously. But as far as I think we did a good thing in 2011 when we put a 3-year limit on the amount of time that a property could be registered, and after that time, it either has to be a building has to be registered if it's abandoned and it has 2 or more building violations, or it's open, or it's secured in an unconventional way, like the windows are boarded up. So the problem, I think, with the current ordinance, which maybe many of us didn't foresee at the time, but I can see it now, is that it's human nature for people to, if they have a 3-year deadline, wait till it's almost, the 3 years are almost up, and then maybe start working on the property. There's no reason for that, and that's why the legislation I'm working on that we may introduce tonight would require, it's implemented gradually, but it would require the property owner to start working on the property within 1 or 2 years, first 2 years, and then it goes back to 1 year of when it's registered. And if they do, then they can get some additional time for registration, but if they don't, then they're at the end, if they just do nothing. And I think once they start working on the property, if it's within a year or within 2 years, they're not going to just start working and then stop and say, well, now I'm going to wait till the end of the 3 years.
So you can't re-register someone, like you can't, if you start working on it and then you stop. You
Well,
work on it for a year and a half.
right now the law is, well, it doesn't matter whether you do any work on it or not. You get 3 years to have it registered, and at the end of the 3 years, if you have a building permit in place, it seems it's not really clear, but it seems that the law is that if you have a building permit, you can have the time until the building permit expires to fix up the property, and then at that point, if it's still is not inhabitable, then the city can assess fines of, I think, $750 a day, and at some point, those continuing fines, it'll get so high it'll exceed the value of the property.
What do you think about that plan? Do you think that would be helpful?
Oh, I would love for abandoned properties to be taken down sooner than 3 years. I think 3 years is too long. I think the group that proposed this idea, ICON, proposed 1 year, and at that point, there's a mass hump you need to get past of these properties, and they figure at that time 1 year just wasn't feasible. It'd be either too costly to the city to implement, and that would probably cause problems in itself. And so you want to do it well, and so they allowed 3 years to actually try to get past this hump. The goal is getting past the big backlog. I think it's like 1,800 houses that are on the list right now. So you get past that backlog, and if you get past that, then perhaps you can get to a yearly rotation. There are different programs out there. One is like establishing a city land bank like we have in Enos Park. And if you create that legal entity, then you are allowed as that legal entity to go looking for other funds. So you're not just going back to the city and say, hey, we need money out of the general revenue fund. The FHA actually has programs called the 203K loans that certain banks can participate through, that entity can apply for loans to acquire the abandoned property and revitalize it, either in the mission of having to tear it down because it's structurally unsound, or revitalize the property for sale. And once they sell it to whoever purchased it, that loan can be transferred either to the individual who has bought the house. And so you can create this new different funding pool. Instead of having to keep going back to the city and say, hey, we need more money out of the general revenue fund, you can start creating unique ideas or unique opportunities for additional funding to solve this problem that we continue to face. And then with that, you want to put Springfield in the proper place to advocate for federal and state dollars to tackle these problems. In 2000, I think it was when they had 2011, when they had the financial crisis, back in 2008, and then they're dealing with the mortgage crisis. Congress enacted a neighborhood stabilization program, and they allocated about $5 billion in 3 different phases. And so you want to put Springfield in the proper position to apply for those grants, apply for that fund, and so we can get federal dollars to help tackle that problem. To my knowledge, I don't think Springfield did apply for those funds and receiving those funds. The state of Illinois did, and they received a lump. Then I don't think that filtered down to Springfield.
Well, if I'm on the abandoned houses, we did dramatically increase the number of houses demolished. I think under prior administration there were only about maybe 50 or so houses. I don't have the exact number, but it was 50, 60 houses demolished. And under the current administration, it's been in the last 4 years about 230, and they expect to be up to maybe about 270 by the end of the Houston administration.
It'll be fine.
Yeah, under that law, the state passed it. It required entities that file mortgage foreclosure suits in large numbers, to which most of the banks, to pay an additional fee if they. I don't remember the exact details of the legislation, but maybe if they filed 50, they had to pay one fee. If they filed 100 a year, they had to pay a higher fee, and so on. In any event, the money raised from that went into a fund to 2 different funds. And one was to assist people whose houses were mortgages were being foreclosed upon, to give them assistance, and the other was to assist communities, local governments, in demolishing abandoned properties. And so those funds were made available. You could apply for them through a grant request. I urge the city to do so, and the Illinois Times wrote an article about my involvement in that, and my advocacy for that, and the city did eventually apply for those funds and did get some of those funds to demolish properties. So we're able to demolish more properties than we were, would otherwise have been able to do.
It has occurred to some of us before that the properties are coming down, which is good because nobody wants properties. But it seems like it has stopped there, and there's not a lot of activity to get that land back into the do some tax money or some use. So it seems like you both have some ideas.
Yeah, the last thing you want is just have vacant land all throughout. You don't want to become Detroit. You just look at aerial photos of Detroit, and it's just, vacant lots everywhere, and that decreases the property values and the tax base for the schools and the city and every certain park districts and whatnot. You do want to try to revitalize that property first, and so that's why those loans are a good avenue of revenue to look for to try to tackle those, because sometimes the easiest solution is to just tear down the property and then just move on to the next one. So if you had an entity that doesn't have to totally, constride by the city's funding constraints, and then can try to revitalize it. Probably because look what they did to my house personally. Is one of the houses that Bud Ferrara did, and he's done about 20 of them in Enos Park, and it was 1 day away from demolition. It was, I think he purchased it for a couple $1,000s before the construction crane was right there, that the next neighborhood block, getting ready to tear it down. He saw opportunity there, and this opportunity brought in a family to the neighborhood. And so, if you can have more success stories like that, our property tax base will go up.
A couple of aldermen mentioned that there's a difference between the lot widths and when it's older properties. I think it's they're 40-foot lots, and now you have to put 80-foot lots in.
They're not,
Not familiar either?
yes, down on, I think, near south of South Grand, there's some lots down there that the city's acquired. The problem is the lots are too small for modern development standards.
And that's not an issue in 5 necessarily?
Their lots are pretty big. We're in Enos Park.
Well, yeah, on the, you're right, once the houses are torn down and you have the vacant lot, what do you do with it? Because it doesn't look good to have a lot grown with weeds. So first of all, just for the interim or initially, I think the city can help spur community gardens or maybe postage stamp parks, small parks, that so the property at least looks, the vacant property or vacant land, I should say, at least looks nice and won't deteriorate from the overall freshness of the neighborhood. And we do have some community gardens in Enos Park and in other parts of the ward. There are some, and also there was a vacant lot that the Enos Park Development Company, Limited Liability Company, sold to, or gave, I think just conveyed it to the, I think there were 2 of them, to Habitat for Humanity. One on one of them was on North 5th Street, I think, or North 6th, and
North
the other
6th.
one was on 7th Street. The one on 7th I know pretty well because that was, I actually worked, volunteered and did some work on that Habitat for Humanity house. So that's a good use. Maybe I would look into creating some kind of economic incentive for builders or for homeowners to build on those vacant properties.
Detroit is selling them for $1.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
What do you think of that?
I think. Well, if the city owns the property, I think that's a good idea. If we can, if we can get somebody to, to develop the property and to build on it, yeah, I would say give it away or sell it for $1.
So when we knock down a building, the property owner still owns that property?
Not necessarily. It could be.
Knox Flats, didn't they abandon their ownership when that was ordered to be demolished? I don't quite understand how that works.
I think sometimes that's the case, but like with this Knox Flats apartment building that was knocked down, the owner the owner still owned it when it was knocked down, and he was ordered to demolish it. And if he didn't demolish it by a certain date, the court gave the city the permission to demolish it because it was a dangerous structure. So in that case, I believe the landowner still owns it, but there's a lien on the property for the cost of the demolition.
Yeah, the end result varies about how it gets demolished or revitalized, and in most of the cases in Enos Park, it's the land bank acquires the property through either tax sale.
So the property is no longer the property of the original owner?
Right.
By virtue of what?
By virtue of the land bank. The land bank acquires the property either through a tax sale.
Oh, so they pay a tax sale?
Right.
Because they have a lien on the property?
Correct.
They're not paying?
Right. Through different avenues. However, in some cases, yeah, the property owner might hand over the keys and say, "Here, I'm done with it."
I don't want to pay property tax on this purchase.
Right.
Well,
And there's actually an example of one that's we were given to by the hospital, I think, and we're looking to move it. And so the right people who can pay the amount to move the house from, I think, 3rd Street to Rafter, they own a house. They'll probably end up being like a $150,000 house, but they'll get it for however it costs to move it.
that's there's a block that the hospital took over the entire block. They demolished every house on the block, but there was one that Enos Park Neighborhood or Limited Liability Company asked the hospital to save and for the permission to move it. And they said, okay, you know, if you can get it done within X amount of time, you know, we'll let you do that. The land bank that Andrew refers to, the Enos Park Development Limited Liability Company, they get all their funds to purchase these properties from the Enos Park TIF, which is our city tax dollars, and all that money has to be appropriated by the city council. And I've been on the council, a strong supporter of funding that, because we need that to develop and to redevelop and rehabilitate the neighborhood. Other neighborhoods unfortunately aren't so lucky. They don't have a neighborhood TIF, but that's one thing that's really helped turn around the Enos Park neighborhood.
Let's talk about CWLP for a little bit.
City what?
CWLP.
Yeah, sure.
I guess I would start by asking, in your opinion, how does CWLP need to look at any kind of construction of rates, raising rates? What do you think of the rates in the larger picture of finances?
Well, if you talk to the citizens out there, they're going to tell you the rates are, I don't know if you're talking about water rates or electric rates, but the electric rates are going to tell you they're too high. And I would like to not see any increase in rates, if we can avoid it. Right now, there's no rate increases on the table. One thing that I'm not in favor of that the city has, or CWLP Brass had proposed, was increasing the usage charge. That's like saying, if you walk into Starbucks, you got to pay a fee just for the privilege of walking into Starbucks. Even if you don't order any coffee, you still got to pay a fee. So I realize, there's some usage. We do have a usage charge, which is a flat charge you have to pay every month, regardless of how much electricity you use. And there should some charge is okay, but to increase it dramatically, I don't think is a good idea. I think it discourages conservation, because you can't then you have less control over your bill based on the amount you use. So
Wait a minute, a usage charge would be cost neutral according to Poppy. It would be revenue neutral, but it would more accurately portray costs for people who use more electricity. Have I got that wrong?
Well, it's a flat charge that the customer pays each
Flat
month.
fee, so how is that discouraging high usage?
Because you pay the same whether you use more or less electricity. Then you pay a lesser percentage of your bill would be based on your usage. So if you say 100% of your bill is based on usage, that would encourage conservation even more. And the same goes for water. I think we should develop more of a rate structure where the first unit is cheaper, maybe very little, and then as the units go up, they get more and more expensive per unit.
Isn't that a usage charge?
No, that's a demand charge. Demand is based. In the lingo, I think a demand charge it's based on the amount of the product you use, electricity or water, but usage. Well, the what I'm talking about is a flat fee versus the fee based on how much you use.
I think what he's referring to is like the meter charge is what they're looking at. Director Hobby wants to raise the meter charge so it's more parity with other electric utility companies around, and perhaps lower the rates, and so it's a little more competitive. Because that's one of the things right now, due to municipal aggregation the last couple of years with the wholesale power, cities were able to come together and bid on power, and that lowered the wholesale electric rate for them, lowered their supply rate. Springfield doesn't do that because we have the opportunity to own our own power plant, and that for years has made the Springfield electric rate lower prior, but now due to this the economic market and how it affected the utility rates, and then new state law around allowing municipal aggregation, that's not the scenario we're in. But I think a lot of those contracts are getting ready to expire, and those rates are going to go up, so there will be some parity soon, because I don't think those lower contracts are going to probably survive. So right now is not the time to raise electric rates because it does place us at a competitive disadvantage when trying to attract new employers, new businesses, and new residents. But there will be a time when we most likely will be in parity with other communities. And as for the finances right now with CWLP, you want to make sure that you're squeezing every dime out you can. I think they're getting to that point. There has been a history of the power plant being a political dumping ground. You want to make sure that's not the case anymore. So you want to make sure that those dollars are being used appropriately. And so then you want to wait kind of for the market to seal itself. Because when they were talking about this issue back in the summer, they thought technical default, the loans would be pulled, we no longer have the line of credit, and I think someone said the fear might be the power will go out. The power will never go out. It's not going to repossess the power plant. We own the power plant for good. So I think there was a little bit of fear mongering back then. The situation stabilized. The market stabilized a little bit. The wholesale market improved. We got new customers. Our balance sheet improved a little bit. So some aldermen saying the wait and see approach might not have been the best advice, but sometimes in certain situations like these, you kind of do need to wait to see how how the market's going to play out, because it does fluctuate. But with that also, I think you need to take as much political decision out of CWLP as possible, and the Citizens Efficiency Commission recommended Public Utility Commission. If you can appoint those members, appoint experts. Don't appoint politicians to this commission. Take as much politics out of these rate decisions as possible. Allow the director to make business case rate decisions like other power plants do, the Illinois Commerce Commission. Allow that to occur, and I think we won't see these spikes of we're fine and then all of a sudden we have a problem, and then we're fine and all of a sudden we have a problem. Kind of level it out a little bit, make it fair for the residents of Springfield for some long-term predictability, and then also businesses that come to Springfield.
So what has been your position on the oversight?
Well, I'm not for ceding city council's control over CWLP to some unelected committee, and then make it easy to raise rates because they don't have to answer to the electorate. That's wrong. But what I would like to do is I'd like to create a advisory committee to the council and for the mayor on CWLP, which would be composed of citizens who have citizens from our community, including citizens that have expertise in the areas of electricity and water. And we do have a lot of people in our community who have expertise, which they would be willing to serve, and I think we should tap that knowledge. And because most of the aldermen don't have any particular. I mean, now we have, after doing it for a number of years, have some expertise, but not the kind of expertise like people have who've worked in the field. And I consult with experts like that on these. When I have to decide what to do on CWLP, I do it on an individual basis. But it'd be good if we had a committee together that could advise us and make recommendations.
Governor Ronner has been talking about so-called right-to-work zones. To community set up. What are your thoughts on should Springfield have something like that?
Has what?
Should Springfield have right-to-work?
No, absolutely not. I mean, if what we have now is a situation is a worker, if it's a closed shop, they're not required. I mean, Rauner has really been inaccurately stating what the facts are. Nobody's forced to join a union. It's only they have to pay the fair share if somebody is in a closed shop and the union is collectively bargaining for that employee, and the employee is required to pay the cost, for the service that the union is providing. And I think that's fair. Otherwise, you have free riders. It's like, you don't have to pay for your police officers or your firefighters unless you want to. I mean, taxes aren't voluntary. So I think that I would not be in favor of the so-called right-to-work zones.
Oh, I oppose the right-to-work zones. I'm pro-union. I'm supported by labor organizations. I grew up in a union household. I totally 100% behind the right to collective bargaining. It's no different than a business association forming an association for its members and bidding for its goals. So no, I would oppose right-to-work zones.
And then also, Governor Ronner one of his proposals is to proposed cuts would affect the local share taxes for communities. How do you see that? If that goes through, what will that do to Springfield?
Well, it's be very bad for Springfield and all other municipalities and local governments. I think that's fundamentally wrong for the state. Governor Rauner does that, or the state does that, because when the income tax was first adopted back when Ogilvie was governor, there was an agreement that the local governments or municipalities would be, home rule municipalities would be prohibited from levying their own income tax. In exchange for that, they were to get a certain percentage of the state income tax revenues, and that's always happened. And even when the temporary income tax increase took place, it was adjusted. The amount of the local government share was adjusted so that it stayed the same. The percentage differed, but it was done and adjusted in such a way so that the municipalities didn't get any benefit from the increase, but they maintained what they had all along. And I think to now, decrease it. They didn't get the benefit when it was increased, so I don't think they should now, take less, even though the taxes are the same. Back down to where they used to be, the state income tax rate.
What have been your thoughts on that proposed cut?
Well, I think it's another example of the state pulling the rug out from under municipalities to try to solve their own problems that they created in the first place. Alderman Cahnman was correct that was a deal that was made up when they started the income tax, and that's just a commitment that they should stick with. There's multiple examples of the state trying to do that, and I would advocate, with the city, to the state government to ensure that that does not happen. They did it to us when we built the new power plant at CWLP. There was a handshake agreement saying we get $35 million from GCO to help construct it. That check never came, and that caused the situation we're in now with the CWLP's problems. And then the state's doing it to education funding for higher education. They continue to lower that appropriation in our universities, and it just makes the tuition higher, and then the students are having to go increase their federal loans. And so when they're graduating from college, they have the equivalent of a mortgage payment already. And so it's just delaying our future growth as a society. And so I would, it's got to stop. And that it would not be fair for the state to do that to municipalities.
The city council that voted to approve an inspector general position
We did approve. Well, there was always a provision for an inspector general in the city code since Sarah was mayor, but it wasn't being used. After a few years, when it was first enacted, it stopped being used, and so we passed an ordinance that changed the inspector general position to make it more, up with the times, more modern.
Do you believe the city should be funding an inspector general?
I believe we should have an inspector general, and we should look at opportunities to fund that, because I think in the long run, perhaps the savings that it might save the city through findings might pay for itself. I don't think in the short term it will. But if we had additional revenues to support it, sure. My priority would be a city planner. I think we should probably shift those dollars to the city planner, or first make that a priority for a city planner. We're one of few cities in Illinois that does not have a city planner. A person that wakes up every day and says, "How can I make Springfield better?" It's because we've not had a city planner. It's caused havoc to our zoning and our zoning variances. It's caused havoc to our economic growth. We've only grown at 5% in the last 5 years compared to other municipalities like Champaign. I think they've increased by 15 to 20%. Bloomington about the same comparable. We're comparable sized cities, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be growing as well. And I think a large part of that is to do with the city planner. We seem to have a regional approach to planning. The hospitals have their own plan, it seems like, and the West Side has its own plan. Enos Park has its own plan. Neighborhood associations have their own plan. It all needs to come together, and I think a city planner would help coordinate that process.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think a city planner is a good idea. I mean, it's not like we don't have any planner. We got Paul O'Shea in the Economic Development Office that he's not a city planner per se, but he does some of that work. And we do have the Regional Planning Commission, which does plans for the city as well. It's actually called the Springfield Sangamon County Regional Planning Commission. But I think it would be helpful to have a city planner that can focus just on the city and developing the city better than what we're doing now. I'm not sure that a planner alone is going to cause growth to go, shoot up to, 10, 15, 20 points, but it probably would help.
Can you think of any issues in Ward 5 that could have been averted or addressed in the city?
Off the top of my head,
Or
can't.
that could have helped something? Could have been helpful in Ward 5.
That's something I'd have to research. I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
I can give you two. Well, back to your point about Paul Shea and the Sangamon County Regional Planning Commission. They do have great plans for us, and Paul Shea will be one of the first to admit that we need a city planner. It's just implementing those plans. So it's almost you need a city implementer to make sure that those plans are being implemented correctly. But back to the point, Ward 5 would have benefited greatly from a city planner being there to help with zoning variance decisions. The House of the Rainbow, for a key example. A city planner would have helped with zoning and a neighborhood coordinator to help identify that that house has been in violation of zoning for the past however many years, and probably would have taken care of that issue a long time ago instead of just popping up, because I think our neighborhood association took a proactive role in identifying those problems and bringing those problems to light to the city council. So when the city council makes decisions on zoning variances, I think it would be nice to have a city planner there to act as consult along with the zoning commission on recommendations and say, so when we make these zoning decisions, these variances, is it fitting into the plan that we adopted, that we agreed to, that this is going to be our plan for the future? When we make the decision now for this zoning variance, does it fit with the plan that we created and the plan that we should be sticking with for our growth, for our city? And having somebody there to have a check on that, I think would have been a great asset to some of the decisions in Ward 5. And also, North Grand Avenue. You look at North Grand right now, and it's on the decline. And I think having someone who would have made North Grand Avenue as a focal point of economic development for the north end of the city, North Grand might look a little different than it does today. And then also partnering with the hospitals. The hospitals have a part of the medical district. Well, their problem there is they got a lump sum from the state for a while, and then that money ran out, and then they created their plan and kind of forgot about it. Well, the process when that plan was put together, having a city planner incorporate that into a city plan, it probably wouldn't have been given up on, and we probably would have some new businesses in the medical district.
Well, I don't see how a city planner would have affected the Rainbow House situation, because the city planner's job isn't to go around snooping around and looking at each house and see what's going on in there. And the only reason that the House of Rainbow came to the attention of the city and to the public is because a murder occurred on 9th Street, and it turned out the perpetrator lived in one of those halfway houses on 10th Street. And so when that came to the attention of the city, the zoning department got involved and determined that it was a violation of the zoning laws, and we know what happened from there. As far as North Grand Avenue, that's a project that I'm working on right now with the Lincoln Park Neighborhood Association. We got a design put together to. North Grand Avenue, I could see it should be something like MacArthur Avenue. The development potential there, it's really underdeveloped, and so in any event, we got a kind of a rough design for the Regional Planning Commission put together for the Lincoln Park Neighborhood Association, and now the association wants to develop that into a plan, like a blueprint that a landscape architect would put together. So they asked me to go to the Economic Development Office, which I did, to try to get some. That's in the North Grand Avenue, happens to be in the Enos Park TIF, as it goes through, includes both sides of North Grand. So I went to the Economic Development Office and to get funds to get an landscape architect to put the plans together, and we're in the process of doing that. We're supposed to have a meeting on that this week, and I'm even thinking that maybe we should because the North Grand, the Enos Park TIF only goes up to, I think, 3rd Street on North Grand, and then there's all that area farther west, including Monument Avenue, which is the entrance to Oak Ridge Cemetery, the second most visited cemetery in the country. And so I'm also looking into maybe the possibility of the creation of a North Grand Corridor TIF, similar to the MacArthur Avenue TIF.
It's 1:40. I know I've been you guys back to where you need to be. Do you have any other questions that we can get to?
Oak Ridge and Ward 5.
Yes, it is.
What was the question?
Oak Ridge.
Oak Ridge, yes, it is in Ward 5, yeah.
Oh, how many voters? Oh, the cemetery. Talking about the cemetery or the neighborhood? No.
That's the problem. The roads are deteriorating because people don't vote there. They have a problem with infrastructure at Oak Ridge, and it's been generally excluded from city care. What's your opinion on that, and how would you approach resolving some of their issues?
You're talking about the cemetery or the neighborhood, Oak Ridge?
Cemetery.
The cemetery. Well, it's city-owned, as I understand. It has its own fiscal problems, and I think we're about $400,000 in it the last budget, if I'm not mistaken. So it does have issues, infrastructure issues. You just make it part of the next round of infrastructure improvements to fund out of the plan. Either do it out of the $86 million that's, if it's not been allocated out of the bonding, or you look at new approaches to fund those improvements. I wouldn't want to charge a fee or anything for people to visit the cemeteries because it's like Alderman Cahnman said, it's a jewel of the city. It's a jewel of the North End. You don't want to attract visitors to that. It produces economic activity.
As far as Oak Ridge, there has been a lot of improvements recently. I think the city's paid a lot more attention to it. Some of the roads have been improved, and a new gate was created on 3rd Street, which was the old gate that actually Abraham Lincoln's tomb went in.
Private fundraising.
That was private fundraising, but I mean it's still an improvement, and that's where the procession from the funeral coalition is supposed to enter with Lincoln's tomb. So, but the Oak Ridge is doing better also in bringing in revenue. We just had a report. The Oak Ridge just came to us with an ordinance the other day, which we passed. And they have a gentleman who's selling the services and based on commission, and what the administration asked for is an ordinance to allow him to be paid more in commission because he's selling so much that his commissions would be higher than the previous year. So we passed that. So I think. And I think we also have to be cognizant of making the cemetery tourist friendly because it is the second most visited cemetery in the world. And it used to be open, the gates used to be open till 8 o'clock, I think either all year round or maybe till, I think it was maybe till November 1st. And then all of a sudden this September 1st of 2014, they closed the gates. They're open at 8 o'clock until 8 in the summer, and then on September 1st of 2014, they decided to change that and just close them at 5 p.m. when it's broad daylight out. And I got complaints from a lot of neighbors that are very upset because they see tourists coming there pulling up, a little after 5, and their doors are locked. They want to get in and they can't get in. So I brought it to the Oak Ridge Cemetery Board, and because they didn't have any public hearings, there was no publicity, nothing. It was just, they did vote on it, but they didn't hold public hearings. So the cemetery board, they voted that sometime after the funeral reenactment, they're going to hold public hearings because this won't come into play until next September 1st. So when they're going to have to determine if they're going to close at 5 again or some later time. So I think they should not be closing at 5 p.m. on September 1st. I understand the need to keep it locked when it's dark because there has been mischief and there was some vandalism that went on there by Lincoln's tomb in the past. But when it's broad daylight and on September 1st, we should not be closing the gates at 5 p.m.